All right, let's do before A2 STEAM for 100.
Gotcha. You gonna read it? I can read it. This was the year Northside School was built. Seeing students take the lead in that, to be the historians, the researchers that go into the history, to be those historians, to be those tour guides, to be the, I'll say, owners of the narrative of the school, which I think ties them into the legacy. I think this all builds towards a very real kind of investment that the students have in their education. And as a parent, what could you want more?
This is actually two schools because Northside was STEAM was built on top of Northside. The blue parts are STEAM, the brick is Northside. The most interesting part I learned was that Donald School had no desks, and before that was fifth board, and fifth board changed the name. Before that it was Union.
The first graders were really excited to learn about the history of our school, and it was really fun to collaborate with other grades, such as the 8th grade African American Studies class and the second graders, so that they could show off what they did last year. And then this year's first graders wanted to take it a step further and really be able to share the history with the community. So we were very lucky to work with the Ann Arbor District Library.
The first grade project is amazing. I always learn something new about the history of A2 STEAM, the history of Northside, going back to 5th Ward School. Our first graders did an amazing job.
I was so impressed with all the work that all the first graders put into this huge project. It's taken a month or more. It started with coming to the library to learn about the Ann Arbor 200, and then going throughout the community and all the things that you've learned. We're really impressed with that, and we're excited that we get to show the posters that you've all made at the Traverwood branch of Ann Arbor District Library, and so the whole community gets to see it.
So I'm hoping that the kids really appreciate history and learning a little bit more through an authentic lens about the history of their school. If you notice in the background, these are like some of the projects that we've done for the last 2 years. 2 years ago, they did a time capsule. So that cohort of students will kind of, remember some of the things that they put in the time capsule. Last year, they created a timeline and then a historical tour. So we've been able to kind of tap into some of the knowledge that like the second graders who were first graders last year, that the second graders learned, and they actually came in and taught our current first grade students about what they remember about the history of our schools.
When I asked them to think about closing sentences to tell about the history of STEAM, most of them just wanted to talk about how amazing it is right now, which was kind of fun, talking about how all people belong here, kids saying that the projects are really fun. I'm trying to think what else, but just it was a nice love fest.
I've been here since I was a senior at Scott, and I was a kindergartner in Mrs. McGarty's class at Northside Elementary. I love Mrs. McGarty. She was absolutely exceptional and fabulous. We had a really, really wonderful experience actually at Northside. It's our neighborhood school, and all the friends were here, and it was just kind of lovely.
My mom started bringing us over here, so me and my older brother came here in 2001. And I was here 3rd grade through 5th grade. Loved it. It was great with that panel. I got to sit on a panel with Kevin Carr, who was my principal at the time, which was really cool.
It was kind of like when you go, I remember as a kid, we had an attic and we'd go up there and we would see like some of the boxes and it's like, oh, this is some stuff from like my parents' past. It was kind of like that, like it was this treasure and you're trying to put this puzzle together and these kids are intrigued by it. You're intrigued by it because you don't really know much about the history either. I think that's the beauty of project-based learning is that the teacher doesn't have to know everything, but it's neat how it just kind of evolved. And now it's in a point where I didn't realize we were making such a huge impact on the community because now we're sharing like the local history of the school with others, which is a neat thing to be able to share.
Population of the school was really low. My daughter had split classes for 1st and 2nd grade because they didn't have enough to make 2 of each of those grades, and I think there might have been only 1 in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So the population was really low. The entire wings of the school unused. We were certain that they were going to close Northside because the population wasn't there. It just wasn't worth keeping open. One afternoon when they started to release all this information, we're all picking up our children after school. So we were outside the building, waiting, all on our phones, looking at what was going on. Some message boards were coming out. Like, they're gonna make this a STEM school. We didn't have STEAM at the time. Once they added the A to STEM and it became STEAM, it became really a lot more interesting to me. That I really, the concept of integrating all of that together. The project-based learning stuff didn't come until later, but that was very intriguing as well. But I mean, just the excitement, there was just so much excitement about what the school was going to become.
I don't know that we knew exactly what to do. I think we figured it out along the way. And that's why it worked. Because everybody that came there wanted to be there. And they wanted to be there for that shared vision. And that they had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of excitement, and they worked really, really, really hard.
I would potentially be on a staff with other people that were interested in integrated units, interested in project-based learning, interested in just doing things a little bit differently was super appealing.
I thought first like, oh, I really want to work here. And it was everything I was doing in my own island, in a very small school, with very little resources. And this would be just great.
STEAM project-based learning focused school in the district, it made me really proud to have what I thought was such a high quality example of what we're about in an integrative STEAM approach. That it's not just siloed subject areas, but that we have opportunities to do really deeply integrative learning.
What an opportunity to like teach where my kids are, and project-based learning and IB are so similar, and it's something I'm very comfortable with, having been a middle school science teacher for a very long time. Like, it has always very much been project-based for me.
Here we are with 30 kids in the classroom each, and we're, doing these incredible PBL units for the first time. Like, we're kind of diving into everything and getting our feet wet, and we pulled out some pretty incredible projects.
That first core group of people came, it was just like kind of overwhelming because the building was like not really done, and we were putting together a whole new curriculum and a whole new purpose for school and learning.
So it was interesting, this sort of mix of like enthusiasm, but also some curiosity and maybe more trepidation.
I felt sort of revitalized, like this is what I want to do and where I want to be. It was a lot of work getting ready. We spent all summer meeting, learning about the PBL process. I distinctly remember still like it was yesterday, my first day, and thinking midway through the day, like, this is what I always thought teaching was going to be. This is where I belong. This is what I always dreamed it would be. The love of learning from the kids and how intrigued they were by everything and how interested they were in everything was just amazing. It was very different from the environment that I came from.
Starting something new, and it was extra energy that I had seen in other schools. It didn't seem like we were competitions to whose ideas had to be used. It was, let's make a really big idea together.
They're going to be turning it into a STEAM school, and it might be worth looking into. They had a bunch of events here leading up to it, talking about like what STEAM meant. Part of the STEAM education is trying things and not always getting the desired result, but even in those failures, you learn from that and you build, and that's success as well. And I remember my husband like turning and looking at me and being like, I didn't learn that kind of like thinking until I went to university. And so I think after just going to that first event and being like, no, this is it, and sort of feeling like, well, we're it, like we're in the neighborhood, like we have the golden ticket, like we get to do this.
I think we're a little overwhelmed, but yet excited, and somehow we all pulled together and pulled through and made things happen. And that was fun. I mean, it was fun to go through it together.
Everybody was really motivated to be on board with project-based learning and team building and building a sense of community and family environment. So it was just such a warm place to be. It still is now. I mean, it's a great place to be. I think people that work here really love working here.
It was so hard that first year because we were working so hard, and those moments where we could just like get together and celebrate and kind of go, this is why we're doing it.
We set, at the beginning of the year, we're going to do 4 expos, 4 big projects each quarter, and we were very aggressive because we could do this, we have all these ideas, and then we get closer to one and we're like, nobody's ready for an expo, we don't have any projects done because, certain things were taking a lot longer, and, so after we got through the first one, which was like throwing a wedding, we're like, okay, maybe we just do 2. Let's start with 2.
I do remember my first expo. I was really proud of it. I really liked it. We did a thing about plastics in the waterways. We took the standards. It was about like just basically they had to understand the water cycle and our water system. The professor who studies this, so she came in and talked to the class and she gave them feedback on their projects, and it was the funniest thing in the world. She talked to them like they were master students, and they talked back the same way. And at the end, she turns to me and goes, "Oh my gosh, they're fourth graders." And I was like, yeah. She's like, "I just talked to them like they were master students," because she was giving them like real substantive information, you know. And it was a blast.
Our first expo, we just had so much excitement and anticipation building around it, and we worked so hard to showcase. We really wanted to show the community like what we were all about and what PBL was and how we were different from other schools. And so there was a lot of anxiety too, but it was just such an amazing event. It was so powerful to see how knowledgeable our kids were and how professional they were, how they could share their learning. We had not only families there, but like community members, because so many people wanted to see what we were all about. So it was a really proud moment. And it was just really neat to see the kids get to share their learning in such a positive way.
I have all these snippets. And the common theme of all of my snippets was this like togetherness, like that first expo, and how wild it was, and how many people were there, and how when I got home I couldn't go to sleep for so many hours because just like the endorphin rush and the excitement of like seeing everybody and watching my students and everybody else's students do really cool things.
Expo was crazy. The first year, I felt like we were all working so hard. It was twofold, right? We wanted the students to really have fun and enjoy it and feel like it was a good celebration and an authentic sort of culmination of their learning. And also, I think we felt this desire to sort of show what the program could do, even from the very beginning.
I think a lot of my favorite experiences or memories are from Expo. That first Expo was amazing. That was like the energy rush that came with that was a lot of fun. And I knew like after that first one, I was like, wow, this is the why. This is exciting.
The kindergartners made self-portraits, and then they did these cute videos of what they wanted to be when they grew up.
I felt like it was gonna be like herding cats, right? Like I'm gonna go into this classroom and it's gonna be complete chaos. And I remember walking into Mrs. Jackson's kindergarten classroom, and she had, there were like wires hanging around, and there was like QR codes next to each of the kids. And this was 10 years ago, so we were not like inundated with QR codes like we are now. I didn't even really know what a QR code was. And I remember I got an iPad and like held it up to the QR code, and then all of a sudden, like my son, a video of him starts playing. And it was like, you remember like the first time you read Harry Potter or you saw the movie and you saw like how the photographs move? I sort of had that moment, and I even turned to my husband and I was like, I feel like I'm in Hogwarts right now, because it just seemed so, it was just amazing. Like you just have this code and all of a sudden the video of your kid is playing. It was such a sense of pride to see like he had been working on this obviously and had recorded himself, and being able to see his hard work, but to see it lined up with technology in a way that I had never seen that before. It's like, oh wow, like this, we really did make the right decision. We're so lucky that he's here. And I mean, and leading up, I mean, all the expos are amazing and they all do more, but just that first one, I think just because not knowing what to expect, and because it was so just innovative and different than what I'd ever seen, it really stands out, and it was so neat.
Watching those kids then graduate just last year was kind of like, oh wow, I remember when you said like, you wanted to be a zookeeper and you wanted to be a professional ice skater, and just like hearing all of those things and like seeing how far they had come.
I think one of the challenges in the interview, and we've talked about this, that a lot of us that were interested in going to STEAM, we were doing some sort of project-based learning, but we didn't have a framework for it. I remember in the interview, given the rubric and the framework for the Buck Institute, and like now having to apply what we were doing and create a new project alongside rubric, it was a challenge because I'd never been asked to do that before, right? Just to create a project, I couldn't have done that. But to make a project that was aligned with the rubric and realizing, okay, there's a system, there's a way that one ought to design a PBL unit and think about learning, that was new for me. I think it was new for a lot of us. So it was humbling.
This woman, Marilyn Hollian, said, do you want to share a cap? I said, absolutely. She had asked what I presented on, and I said project-based learning, because she said that she had a school that was going to open up and it was going to be a project-based learning school. And then I asked her, have they been all trained in project-based learning? And she looked at me and said, no. Then how will they know they're saying the same language? So I feel like I had a small part in that planting that seed, because my question is sometimes, what would it have looked like if they opened up that school without having the same language and having the same belief in North Star of what project-based learning should be?
But as a STEAM school, I think broadening that out to encompass more aspects of design and the ways in which design is an overarching concept that isn't related just to engineering, but is related to communication and artistic practice and all those sorts of things, I think is really appropriate.
Staff was at such a caliber that there was never anything that we did that then we didn't spend the appropriate amount of time reflecting and evaluating. We just didn't go through any motions. Everything was constantly being assessed and evaluated for its effectiveness. Is this on mission? Is this on point with what we wanted to accomplish for the school?
I sort of remember this moment in time where a social studies teacher here at STEAM was describing what they're doing with students. And not only did that fit that idea of oh yes, social studies itself could be this project-based kind of thing, but the teachers were then using this language of PBL works, right, and describing PBL works to me.
When we start planning, the first thing we do is take a long look at the standards during a certain project. And once we have a clear idea of what our expectations are for what we want them to come out learning, we kind of look at the outside edges of the project. So we're thinking about the entry event and about the public product.
It makes the kids think. They have to be really active participants in their learning. They still do learn all the basic skills that they're supposed to, but then they have to apply them in really meaningful ways.
So we had been talking about the pushes and pulls unit and how previously what we have to do for it is the students have to move a rock from one end of the playground to the other end of the playground. Well, this fall, our playground had construction on it. So our kids saw how easy it was for them to move rocks with machinery. So we wanted to do something that was more hands-on and would also be fun for them to follow the design engineering process and then engage with afterwards. So we came up with the idea of using mini golf to teach pushes and pulls. So for kindergarten, we thought this was a great unit because it got them, one, moving, building, and it was something that we thought almost every kindergartner will have engaged with by the time we did the lesson, because we incorporated with PE to where the students were learning about golf before we started building. So the kindergartners went through 3 phases of the design process individually. They came up with an idea, then we collaborated with our teammates to revise our idea, and then we worked with a different table group and came up with a final personal idea. After that, we talked with our table groups, we collaborated and said, well, what is one aspect of each person's individual design we want to have in our final design? So we came up with our first team design rough draft, then we revised that design to tweak it, and then we had learned that our 5th graders know what blueprints are. So we got even bigger pieces of paper so we could draw detailed blueprints to help our 5th graders understand our ideas that we wanted them to help us build. Let's look at this one right here. So if we look at this one, they've got a start spot, they've got lava pits, they've got rocket ships, they've got volcanoes, they've got a spiky area, they've got a ramp, a turtle, a giant tower with a tunnel in it, And then they've even got like over here, they've got like a trick tunnel before they eventually wind up at their hole. The reason I found this project to be so special is because our 5th graders really helped us build it.
What I really like seeing is how different themes are integrated in the different subjects at school. Like, you know, like if they're learning about tiny houses in 6th grade, they're learning not only about like sustainability and science and like weather and thermodynamics and stuff like that, but they're also learning about using geometry in their math and how the different teachers work together and like build upon these concepts coming from all angles. And obviously group project-based learning, you think of just like groups working together, but I really like the idea of taking a theme or like a specific topic and just totally teasing it apart and like in all the different realms of the academics here at STEAM.
And it's funny because I was thinking about the pollinator garden project and how originally we didn't really have that writing component to it. We had the animal research reports that we did separate, and then we had the pollinator piece. And this year we were talking about how can we kind of take something we were already doing like as a standalone thing and pull it into the project and tie it in. And I think with that one, we're always thinking about how can we add more, whether it's, you know, eventually adding a mural. We kind of look at layers and like, okay, here's what we did this year. Can we add this piece maybe next year? And then like in a year or two, try to do like some art collab with it and add this piece, so.
Yeah, so I worked pretty closely with 2nd grade just to like hit hard their vocabulary work. So we were reviewing erosion. So I pulled a small group to the back while the movie was going on, and I told them we'd just do a quick erosion review from our vocabulary. And so we did our little lesson, and one of the students really wanted to keep talking about erosion. She was like, oh, I don't really understand erosion yet. So we just sat together and talked for like 45 minutes during the whole rest of the movie. And I was like, okay, we'll keep talking about it because she really wanted to keep learning about erosion. I see projects across, because I'm almost in, you know, all the grade levels. At some point, I see authenticity of all the projects, and I really see the meaningful work students do, especially our English learners. They get like authentic learning and vocabulary practice in addition to kind of like, oh, we're learning the regular curriculum materials, but they also get a lot more practice with like real life situations, especially with vocabulary where they get a lot more exposure to it. I think it provides a real life situation. When students are learning like social language for the first time, they learn swing, they learn slide, they learn play. Those are the words they learn the fastest because they're surrounded by them. And so that in the same context, that context vocabulary and that content vocabulary, they're surrounded by the garden, the plants, the flowers, the bees. So they learn a lot faster because they want to be able to communicate about what's going on around them versus just learning about it in a book or looking at something that's not real.
So we do a Michigan Masters of Disasters project, and we're trying to teach both science and social studies standards within that of the science standards that are weather-based and understanding the natural hazards that can occur in our area and ways to be safe and protected from those natural hazards. And then also the social studies standards of geography, so place-based social studies standards. And so when we were designing the unit, we were trying to come up with a public product that could make sense with those standards. And so the public product that we currently are using is to design a model of something that can keep people safe and protected in the event of a specific weather hazard. And we steep them throughout the study in information about Michigan hazards and specific hazards that happen in different regions of Michigan to get them to a place where they really understand what they're designing at the end and what they're trying to make a model of, both in terms of what people like to do in that area, but also
what they want their vehicle do to protect from the weather hazard. And then the other part of the public product, there's usually a group component and an individual component. So the model is the group component of that project. They make graphs to determine what weather hazard most impacts the region of Michigan that their group is assigned to or chose to study. And one of the regions, the data comes out to the most impactful hazard being flooding. And so the group who had that region was designing a model about for people to keep safe and protected from flooding. And they decided to design a vehicle because from actual lived testimonials that they read from people who experienced flooding in that region, they learned that one of the things that is a difficulty from floods is traveling in any way, especially because if the flood is high enough, you don't want the engine of your vehicle to get wet because it will, break down. So they designed a very clever model of a vehicle that had really high tires to kind of stay up above the water, and then also had some on the outside there were kind of like spikes, but basically because they knew there would be things floating in the water, there was like resistance to kind of grab those things and be able to go over it. So our individual product is the informational writing piece, and we're integrating the informational reading throughout the unit to learn about the weather and the geography, and we're supporting that also with informational writing, where they're writing about what they're learning, and at the end they essentially develop a design brief for their model that explains the path that they took.
When they get to raise salmon eggs, and they get to learn all about the salmon life cycle, and then they get to go and release them.
I grew up tagging salmon with my dad and grandpa and things like that, so to be able to kind of raise salmon and continue that on, and the health of the ecosystems, it was just this is where you're supposed to be.
They started out sharing their steps in the PBL process, how they started out, what their need to know questions were, and then they moved from there and showing some of their original ideas and rough drafts. They talked about our entry event where we went to Howell Nature Center and looked at different tiny houses there, and then how they brought in their questions of how can we design a tiny house to meet the needs of people everywhere. And so they showed their original rough drafts and the steps along the way, and then eventually they built their tiny houses, and we put them outside we sort of made all of the continents outside on the ground out front, and then they put their tiny houses wherever their country was, and shared with families the adaptations that they made for their houses based on the climate and where their house was.
The 8th graders love it. They get to put together these carnival games, and then they put on a carnival for the little kids. And all of their carnival games are rigged using magnetic fields. So that's our entry point for exploration of magnetic forces. And they absolutely love the event, love the challenge of rigging a carnival game. And it's just a great way to learn about magnetic forces and approach those standards, which we have quite a few standards related to magnetic forces from at a distance. And it's a fun way to approach that. And the little kids love the carnival, absolutely adore the carnival, don't care at all that the games are rigged. We show them partway through, they don't care, they just want to stay and play. When you're doing PBL, you need to make sure that you're hitting all the standards and hitting them the most effective way possible, which is one of the reasons we're constantly refining our projects. But the beautiful thing about the magnetism carnival is that because it's hands-on, we talk about learning in different modalities, visual, oral, tactile. They're literally seeing these standards brought to life through all those different modalities. So I can explain to a child or hand them a reading on the subject of how, magnetic fields diminish over longer distances. They see it actually happen when they're putting this project together, and they see that in order for their carnival game to be more effective, we do study what the appropriate distance needs to be between the magnets to make sure that the magnetic fields are intact and drawing the objects in the direction they want. A reading or even a video on that would not be half as effective as actually building the game and experimenting with those distances and finding out for themselves. That's something that results in a much deeper kind of learning. Now, the thing is a lot of these projects are done in conjunction with hands-on labs. So we, for example, for that project, we do a lab in which they experiment with the distance between magnets, but then they have to then apply that knowledge to their carnival games. In an average school, you would do the lab, you'd record your results, you'd talk about it, and you'd move on. What we're doing is then taking that experimental knowledge and applying it to a hands-on project. That's a much deeper level of learning and a much better analog for real life work, where you're taking whatever it is that you're learning and applying it to a real life problem. It's not just better learning, it's mimicking real life.
The idea of a build, like, when you talk about like software programs, build 1, build 2, whatever, that terminology is used a lot throughout the PBL curriculum here. And I've started to use that sort of, I don't want to say on a daily basis, but I'll use that definitely on a weekly basis. If we're learning a game, I'll say that this is build 1 of the game and this is build 2, and then even let the kids work on a build 3 or a build 4. And I'm talking little kids too, not just like middle school kids. So those two things about what's happening with PBL, I think, are the most exciting things for me. Is that the project that we currently have can still evolve and get better and change, but then also the language and the strategies and the protocol used for projects can be used across the board, in something that's not even a project.
The Silk Road project has been one of the cooler examples of PBL just really taking off and running wild. It's started with this idea of board games for different civilizations. One of the big things that we did in that first year was building this map. What was the map going to look like? How are we going to cut it out? How are we going to make it look and fit and feel like a board game map? And so that was a big portion of it, was figuring out the geography of that, figuring out how to represent it well. But then in addition to that, we had the 3D printing. We had the different regions were all individually studied by students, and they worked together to figure out what were the benefits each group brought to the table. And so we had, different types of ship building, different types of transportation, of even technology like paper was a big one. And when we played that game, it was great. It was really well done, I think, in a lot of ways. But sort of the feedback on it was, one, there were definitely some challenges with it being functional at times, where some civilizations could do more, were a little bit overpowered. We missed a little bit the collaboration and growth. Our question that we had, that maybe it was the second year, was how do we show that the Silk Road supercharged collaboration and development? And I think that just took us in a different direction of, if we're really highlighting the benefit towards all the civilizations, towards all of humanity, we really should be collaborative. The board game really made an intentional choice to make a fully cross-curricular project. Not only are you telling a personal story, but you're able to interact across cultures, across backgrounds, and it made a more organic connection and collaboration piece. Where you realize pretty quickly, if you're traveling the Silk Road, say as a Roman merchant, you're probably going to need some help from other people. A cosmopolitan experience traveling the Silk Road, which is really what we wanted to emulate with the idea of supercharging this collaboration and growth.
Phoenix Press, my baby, such a piece of my heart. So when I came here, it would have been 2021, 2022. I came in mid-year. I was new to the school, new to PBL. I didn't really have any PBL projects, but I knew I wanted some. I believed in the mission, and I believed in the way that students can do something for an authentic reason and not just for their teacher. So that summer I started brainstorming, okay, what is a PBL project that I can do in my own classroom? And I came up with this idea to have the 8th graders make their own children's books. They would write the books, they would edit the books, they would illustrate, they would go through the publishing process. We would talk to our target demographic. We would utilize the fact that we're a K-8 building and talk to our younger students right here in the building. And the first year we did it, it was amazing. We wrote about aspects of our identity. So they had to really think about who are we in this community and what are the identities that belong here. They wrote about an aspect of their identity. We made the books, we printed them on the printer downstairs, stapled them together, and we showed them to our 2nd and 3rd graders. And the 8th graders felt such a sense of accomplishment. They told me at the end of the year that was a favorite thing they did in all of middle school. They absolutely loved it. And so now this year coming in, I was like, absolutely, we're keeping that project, and I want to take it up a notch. I actually want these books published. I want them printed. I want them to hold a book in their hand that is bound. And if possible, I want to sell them. I want their authentic audience to really be beyond just this school building. So we've done the same thing this year. We've met with authors. We've done community outreach and talked with our target demographic. We wrote, we rewrote, we illustrated, and now we are in the very frustrating and long process of getting them actually up and published and available to the world. But it's happening, and books have already been purchased, which is so incredible. And the sales of those books will go back into the Phoenix Press Fund, which will allow books to be made next year and the year after that and the year after that, so that 8th graders for generations can feel the same joy of holding a book in their hands that they wrote, that they made, that they poured their heart into. And when we had our publishing day a couple weeks ago, as the students were submitting their publishing form, I would announce, so-and-so, you're a published author, and just the look on their face and high-fiving each other and the pride that they felt is something I'll never forget. I can't wait to do it again next year. I couldn't tell you a single thing I wrote in 8th grade, but I can tell you these children will remember this for the rest of their lives. They won't forget the story or the writing process or the drawing process or what it took. I mean, 4 months we have spent in every little aspect moving towards this incredibly authentic output. And it's something that they'll take. I mean, I tell them all the time, I'm not a published author. You're a published author, right? Like, not many people get to say that, and not many people get to have the experience of taking their thoughts and their ideas and actually putting them on paper and then putting that out in the world in a way that is taken up so excitedly. Like, the community is really excited about these books. Our teachers, our parents, our community members, they're so excited to see what our students have created. And that goes far beyond any test that I could check off. So when they're writing these books and they're coming up with these words, we're having conversations about story structure and vocabulary and word structure, sentence structure, that is ending up through a project to have a much more authentic application. So you're not learning Latin roots just to learn Latin roots. You're learning Latin roots to find the best vocabulary word that fits your story and fits your character, so that when you put your book out in the world, the people who read it are really like blown away by what you've created.
I also sort of felt like project-based learning gets this sort of strange label that it's like, whatever the kids want to do at the moment, that's what we learn about. And every day we gotta put the plan aside and we do whatever they want to do. And it's not that. But it is about, it's the why. And instead of having to include the why in every lesson, they know the why because it's all encompassing. And they are in. I mean, my son came home and wanted to look at our backyard to figure out where he could help with our erosion in our yard because he took a walk on the playground and they were looking for that. He said, we have these beds, and he's ready to change my backyard simply because the why is in his head, which is amazing.
I think it was in August training, and they were opening it up. surprisingly, I also had a school district that their main focus was on the cultures of thinking. So having this school district where they had different definitions of project-based learning coming in, and they were like, this is what they're going to learn. And then I had this other school district that was all about creating culture. It was a wonderful blend because when they did feedback with each other, it was all of a sudden the projects that were very curriculum focused by this new school that was opening up realized, you know what, we need to create a culture.
So when I first came in, I was hired by Joan Fitzgibbon, who was wonderful, and a couple other people were there, and they really kind of set out what this school was about. I was so nervous because it seemed like a lot of people had been there for a while. I was happy to find out that there were other newbies in year 2 just like me, and the first couple years it was like trying to figure out what my role in a project-based learning program would be. What is the role of an art teacher in this role? It wasn't the same as in another school where you shut your door and you teach your art curriculum and that's it. Here, it was, it took a while to figure out what the best way was for me to collaborate with others. And it was so dependent on the personalities in the building. We had a bunch of hotshot teachers here. Everybody knew their stuff. Everybody was fabulous. Everybody was an expert. But we had to work a lot together to figure out how we work together. And it's not just me in my room. It's me working with you in your project and figuring out the push and pull of like what happens where, location wise, who's making decisions, how do we best facilitate the project for the students, and how do we lean on our expertise.
I think it works because of the trust and respect. I think that if I'm like, ooh, I don't feel like we've pushed this far enough, or I don't think, like, I feel comfortable bringing it up in a respectful way, but then also feel like I can take that feedback if it's like, no, we're not ready for that.
There's a nice balance, I think. There are times that personally I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And then one of you are like, yeah, you can. Let's do it this way. I'm like, okay.
So I think it took time to get to this point.
Oh,
so
for sure.
I think giving each other that space and also collaborating and like sticking to our weekly lesson planning and like, okay, I've got this, you've got that.
Yeah, those check-ins are absolutely necessary. And I think that we do them often because we not only need to, but it makes us feel better.
I think the thing that keeps you going through a hard day here is the fact that you have this great community of people. We're all working towards a common goal. It's established what we're doing here. We know our parts, and it's constantly evolving, but it's like we all have this role to play in building up student knowledge through projects. It's pretty fabulous. So I couldn't ask for a better fit.
I think the teachers here are incredible, very good at what they do, but they're passionate, and they're also open-minded and willing to work with others and think outside the box and create these projects that are hands-on and applicable to students. It's very much not a sit down and learn paper pencil. It's, hey, how can we get them to learn these concepts through doing something and engaging in something?
I've really learned just how supportive the staff can be, how persistent, how dedicated the staff can be here. You're surrounded by people who just give it their all every day, and that's all you can ever ask for. I think what often happens in practice is we have people who are just really good at what they do, and they find a way to bring that energy into what they do. I think if you think about Destiny's Child, for example, like there's a Beyonce, but there's also a Kelly Rowland, right? And so I think we have some people who are talented enough to be Beyoncés, but they do get their Kelly Rowland on, so to speak.
She had the idea for the Winter Arts Market, and she was just given the go-ahead, and she arranged everything in order. And now it's become like this big, great event, and it, just remembering kind of how that started out as an idea that a parent had, and the support that she was given and how it just has grown and become more and more successful. I mean, it's not just, it's first of all a testament to Emily and how amazing she is, but it's also a testament to the school and this community and just how supportive one another this community.
The Winter Arts Market came from an idea that I had when I lived in Portland. When I had done art shows, they had rows of kids who were kid artisans who were also filling up the space and selling. And I loved that. I loved everything about that, about like showing them how to be an artist on their own, how to know that their ideas have worth. STEAM was the type of place that could facilitate an idea like that coming to life. We think about things differently. We are willing to recognize and value creativity, where it wasn't just about production of one product, you know, where we can sort of look at the fact that we are artists not only within the confines of this classroom, you're actually an artist anywhere and everywhere you go. And I think that one of the cool things about WAM was that we had an opportunity to see all of these kids who were willing to recognize that they were artists outside of this space. And so they brought all of these things, these goods that they had made with their families by themselves back into the school. So it's like you got a peek into things that people were interested in, right? Like art making that people were interested outside of the confines of this space. And I think that it really brought the community together in this way. It was really empowering. I think it blew a lot of our minds that we're like, oh my God, these kids made these things on their own. Yeah, they did.
We're a really dynamic community for our school, but also the parents are a really dynamic community. And I think the structure of our school is takes advantage of that dynamism, of the different kinds of expertise and the willingness of parents to chip in. And it's one of the things that I love. I also think it builds a much stronger community. So for me, that's really, really important. And how that's looked for me as a parent at A2 STEAM is being able to go into the classroom. I try to do it every year. Sometimes it depends on how busy I am at work. But it allows me to engage in the A2 STEAM community by bringing my expertise in small ways and in bigger ways in my own daughter's class, but also in other classes, which I really enjoy. I got to share some African American history with them, but it was also a book called, I think it's Bread for Words, which is based off of Frederick Douglass's autobiography, and it's written basically using the primary source as the text, but it's a picture book. So I got to talk about like the actual autobiography, the genre that is unique about this picture book, but then also the power of reading and writing and what that has meant historically for African Americans as a way to inspire. I think she was in second grade maybe at the time. Can't remember which grade it was, but to inspire those students, like, this is why reading and writing is so important. It's not easy to learn how to read and write. And it's something that people struggle to sometimes learn, but it's got a huge payoff, which is a kind of freedom for your mind and a sense of liberation.
I think that there's a certain level of collaboration that takes place here at STEAM that also just goes beyond peer-to-peer interactions. And the ability for us to really engage with our community, I think, takes that into a whole different realm. Keisha Simmons came and spoke with those 8th graders. I myself just had sort of this mind-blowing experience where something that I've been thinking about for a very long time, you know, which is how do you bring in that disciplinary expert, learn from them, and not just have them give a lecture on what they do, right? But try and meet in that middle space where we're going to try and represent in some ways or model off of them their kind of work. I think that's been huge.
Part of that was going on a walking tour. The city has many historical markers. And then a parent, Keisha Simmons, who is a women's studies and African American studies professor at U of M, helped us to on just what it means to be a historian, and also how to track people through available databases. The U.S. Census has a really rich, deep way of tracking people. She taught us how to trace people's journeys. The Great Migration was something that we looked at a lot, and when millions of Black Americans came from the South to the North, and she taught us how to look through census data and historical documents and archives to figure out where the journeys and the migrations had originated from, with a history lesson. And also kind of what it means to fill in some blanks that we can't fill in, and with as educated guesses when we're trying to draw conclusions in history.
I got to bring in sort of my own expertise as a historian, but I've been involved in the school in other ways by, running a local history workshop for 8th graders, and that was also really wonderful because I got to see the middle school. I got to imagine what it would be like for my daughter to be a middle schooler here. I was so scared to run a workshop for middle schoolers. I don't think it's my personal calling to be a middle school teacher. That's a really, really hard job. And I really enjoy 18 and 19-year-olds at the college level. So I was really nervous and really prepped. And I was so impressed with our 8th graders. So one of the joys of doing that for me was just to see how wonderful our middle schoolers are, how empathetic they are for middle schoolers. That's not something that you think of when you think of middle schoolers, but I think our school helps develop a certain ethic and makes a space for empathy and community and connection in a way that I think is actually really rare these days in our society. And so it was really fun to share with them primary sources and history and how you do history. But it was equally as fun for me just to see who they were as learners in a way that I was so impressed with.
That's the thing that we're super excited about the most, is that you folks keep your doors open to people from the outside who may have a specific area of expertise. So this, of course, is our underwater robot. And the students in the underwater robotics program would design parts and design the whole idea and so forth. And one of the things I thought, this wasn't my first realization, but this is super cool. And that was that the students in the underwater robotics club could design something and then actually design this part, this 3D printed elbow right here, and print it and install it and find that it broke and rebuild it in 90 minutes. I mean, this is you could expect that in the automotive business. If kids were able to identify the problem, they would solve the problem, come up with the solution didn't work perfectly, they fixed that solution, and then there we were. So it was just being able to close that loop in something that might have taken, if that were a graduate level course, you'd spend all semester trying to get to that point. And here the kids diagnosed the problem on their own, they fixed the problem on their own, and they implemented it. And that is, that is great learning. When we first pulled this together, we had Jason from the Watershed Council talk about very specific problems that they see, and the kids are listening to that, right? And then we chat with other people with other areas of expertise, an individual from NOAA, the Oceanic Lab here on the south side of town. We had all this kind of involvement with all these people. We were able to cater all those wide, all those broad and varying interests to the Watershed Council, NOAA, maybe the USGS, EPA, and other people here in town. We're able to take a little bit of contributions and tailor it in such a way that we give it to the kids and they can understand the big picture real quickly. And then make decisions based upon that, make decisions about how they want to clean up the river, what they should do. And we've been working on this prototype for several years now, and it's gone from just a workhorse in general, just a generic tool, to one with a vacuum cleaner and a robotic arm and so forth. And the kids do that. The kids come up with what they think their solution to the presented problem will be.
So if you create that culture within the school, and I think Ann Arbor STEAM has done that, has sustained that within its own teacher leadership, within having the means to do it, to support each other, I think that's a beautiful thing, because you've created more than just a program, you've created a culture. And there's very few schools that can do that. There's a lot of schools that can create a program, but schools that can create a culture, that's gold. The people, the children who sit in your classroom is the next government and society of tomorrow. So what am I doing to make sure that they're collaborators, they can think critically, and they can problem solve, and they can communicate their ideas? And also not only communicate, but listen to other perspectives.
I'm hoping that our students will be better learners, will be better teachers, and that those results will show up not only in a tangible way, but in an impactful way as they move throughout the world.
It is kind of life-changing. I know that's like the cliche of like, oh, but it is. Like it's meeting everybody where they need to be and making sure that they get the best. And like that's just what we do every day.
And I feel like sometimes I'm everybody's mom, you know, like I get to watch everybody grow up. It's really fun.
She has no idea what it feels like to be a passive learner, because we don't do passive. You know, we really try not to do passive learners here. You know, she knows what it feels like to engage in content and figure out the way. And you know, in the end, she wrote this really amazing book with beautiful artwork, thanks to Jensen and all of those people, and a beautiful storyline thanks to kindergarten through 8th grade ELA instruction. I'm not worried, but I'm curious to see how, when she sits in a more traditional classroom next to her, she's gonna be like, what is this?
The more that it really dawns on me that we're reaching sort of, I think, the pinnacle of that kind of work. I don't really know of any other place that does it to this extent. Continue to find ways to iterate, the projects over time. I think that's probably a big challenge. That it's one thing to establish a big project, right? But with a new group of students that comes in, really figure out ways that students can approach that same kind of project, but in their own novel ways. Being able to do that keeps it fresh and authentic over time. And so I hope to see that continue.
My hope is that this ride here at STEAM never ends, that we can keep working and developing this together, that we continue to document all of our challenges and all of our successes so that other people can learn from it. I feel like we're kind of like a little lab school here. And I know through the help of PBL Works and other organizations, we are continuing to grow and grow. And I would really like for other educators to be able to experience what we get to experience here. It's such a fun way to do our jobs.